The Forgotten Melody. The grand piano sat untouched in the corner of Eleanor Bennett's living room, draped with a sheet that had collected a thin film of dust. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor, but never quite reaching the instrument that had once been the center of her world. Eleanor stood at the sink, washing breakfast dishes with her good hand, the right one. Her left hung slightly limp at her side, fingers curled inward, a permanent reminder of the taxi accident in Vienna 3 years ago. At 34, she had gone from being hailed as the most promising pianist of her generation to a woman who couldn't button her own coat without wincing. "You've got a new neighbor moving in today," said Vivian, her housekeeper, who came twice weekly more for company than cleaning. "Delivery trucks have been coming and going since dawn." Eleanor nodded absently, her gaze drifting to the cottage visible through her kitchen window. Rose Hill was a small town where newcomers were rare, especially on Blackberry Lane with its mere 5 houses nestled against the countryside. "Did Patricia say who bought it?" Eleanor asked, referring to their local realtor. "Some musician, apparently. Keeps to himself, according to Patricia. Paid in cash and handled everything through lawyers." Vivian wiped down the counter with unnecessary vigor. "Mysterious, if you ask me." Eleanor felt a twist of something, resentment perhaps at the thought of another musician living so close. She had chosen Rose Hill precisely because nobody here knew or cared about classical music. Nobody looked at her with pity when they learned who she had once been. That afternoon, Eleanor ventured into her overgrown garden, secateurs in hand. Gardening had become her therapy, the one activity where her damaged hand could still be useful, gripping stems while her right hand did the cutting. As she worked, the sound of a vehicle approaching made her look up. A black Range Rover pulled into the neighboring driveway. The man who stepped out was tall, with dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. He wore a simple black sweater and jeans, nothing to suggest he was anyone of note. Yet there was something in his bearing, a quiet intensity that made Eleanor pause. He glanced her way, and for a moment their eyes met across the low stone wall separating their properties. Eleanor quickly looked down, pretending to be absorbed in pruning her roses. "Hello," his voice carried easily in the quiet afternoon. It was deep, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Hello," she replied, not looking up. "Welcome to Blackberry Lane." "Thank you." A pause. "Those are beautiful roses." Eleanor nodded curtly. "They were here when I moved in. They seem to thrive on neglect." "The best art often does," he replied. Something in his tone made Eleanor look up sharply. His expression was unreadable, but she felt suddenly exposed, as if he knew exactly who she was. "I'm Marcus Turner," he said. The name meant nothing to her, which was a relief. Eleanor Bennett. If her name registered with him, he didn't show it. He simply nodded and said, "I hope the piano delivery won't disturb you too much tomorrow morning." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I'm an early riser," she managed to say. "It won't be a problem." As Marcus Turner walked toward his cottage, Eleanor's left hand throbbed with phantom pain. A pianist moving in next door. It felt like a cruel joke from a universe that had already taken enough from her. That night, Eleanor dreamt of music for the first time in years. Resonant strings. The first notes drifted through Eleanor's open window like ghosts, tentative, searching. She sat up in bed, the novel she'd been reading forgotten on her lap. 3 in the morning and someone was playing piano. Not just someone, Marcus Turner. Eleanor's first instinct was to close the window, to shut out the sound that reminded her of everything she had lost. But her hand refused to move. The melody was unlike anything she had ever heard, hauntingly beautiful, with a melancholy that seemed to reach directly into her chest and squeeze. For 7 nights, it continued. Eleanor found herself waiting for it, this nocturnal ritual. Sometimes she would sit by her window, eyes closed, letting the music wash over her. Other times she would pace her living room, her damaged hand unconsciously moving in phantom fingerings, muscle memory responding to phrases she would have played differently. On the 8th day, Eleanor found herself standing at Marcus's door, a basket of fresh scones in hand, a flimsy excuse for her intrusion. "I thought you might like these," she said when he opened the door. His hair disheveled as if he'd been running his hands through it. "My apology for not properly welcoming you to the neighborhood." Marcus looked at the basket, then at her face, a faint smile playing at his lips. "An apology or a bribe to find out why I only play at ungodly hours?" Eleanor felt her cheeks warm. I never said I heard you playing. You didn't have to. Your curtains are open every night at 3. He stepped aside. Come in, Eleanor Bennett. I have a feeling you didn't bring pastries just to leave them on my doorstep. His cottage was sparsely furnished, dominated by a magnificent Steinway grand piano placed precisely where it would catch the morning light. Sheet music was scattered everywhere on tables, chairs, even the floor, covered in frantic notations and crossed-out measures. You're composing, Eleanor observed, setting the basket down. Attempting to, Marcus replied. I'm afraid the muse is being rather stubborn these days. Eleanor's gaze was drawn to a framed photograph on the bookshelf, a younger Marcus accepting an award, the Vienna State Opera House unmistakable in the background. Her heart skipped. You're that Marcus Turner, the composer who disappeared. And you're that Eleanor Bennett, he countered quietly, the pianist who stopped playing. The silence between them hummed with unspoken understanding. Your nocturnes, Eleanor said finally. They're extraordinary. They're unfinished, he corrected. Like most things in life. Eleanor found herself drawn to the piano, her fingers hovering above the keys without touching them. Why 3 in the morning? The quietest hour, when doubts are loudest. Marcus moved beside her. Why do you listen instead of sleep? The same reason, perhaps. Their eyes met and Eleanor felt something shift between them, a recognition. Would you like some tea? He asked. Yes, Eleanor replied, surprising herself. I would. They talked until sunrise, about music theory, about composers they admired, about the small-town gossip Vivian had shared. Everything except why he had vanished from the music world 3 years ago, or why Eleanor's left hand remained curled at her side. As she walked home in the pale morning light, Eleanor felt something she hadn't in years, the stirring of possibility. That afternoon, for the first time since the accident, she removed the sheet from her piano and sat on the bench, not to play, she couldn't yet, but simply to feel the weight of the keys beneath her right hand while her left rested in her lap. And when 3 o'clock came the following morning, Eleanor didn't just listen to Marcus's music through her window. She opened her door and walked across the garden to his cottage, where a light burned in the window and the door was left unlocked, as if he had been expecting her. Dissonant chords over the following weeks, Eleanor and Marcus fell into an unusual rhythm. During daylight they led separate lives, Eleanor tending her garden, Marcus secluded with his compositions. But in those quiet hours between midnight and dawn, they shared a world of their own. Eleanor had begun to assist Marcus, offering suggestions on phrasing, sometimes humming passages she couldn't demonstrate on keys. Her analytical mind, once her greatest strength as a performer, proved valuable to his creative process. For his part, Marcus never pressured her to play, respecting the invisible boundaries she had drawn around her injury. You have an uncanny ear, he told her one night as they sat at his piano, mugs of tea growing cold beside scattered sheets of notation. You hear exactly what I'm trying to say before I figured out how to say it. Eleanor smiled, comfortable in this new identity, not a pianist, but still a musician. My professor at Juilliard used to say I could hear the composer's intention beyond the printed page. Grayson? Marcus asked, naming the renowned instructor. No, Falk. Though Grayson did guest lecture occasionally. Eleanor reached for her tea. Did you study there too? A shadow passed over Marcus's face. No, but I've lectured there. Years ago. The conversation drifted to other topics, but something about his hesitation nagged at Eleanor. The next morning, driven by curiosity she wouldn't have admitted to, she did something she hadn't done in 3 years. She searched her own name online. Articles about her accident appeared first, then reviews of her final recordings. And there, on the 3rd page, a scathing critique in the classical voice that had wounded her deeply when it was published. She remembered avoiding reading it fully at the time, the headline alone having been enough. Bennett's interpretation, technical brilliance cannot mask emotional vacancy. Eleanor had forgotten the author's name, but now it glared from the screen. Marcus Turner. While Bennett's technique is faultless, her Chopin lacks the vulnerability that makes this music transcendent. One wonders if Bennett has ever experienced true loss, as her performance suggests a musician who plays notes perfectly while missing their meaning entirely. The words burned anew. Eleanor closed her laptop with trembling fingers. The critic who had dismissed her soul while praising her hands now sat across a garden, unknowingly watching her grapple with the loss of everything he claimed she couldn't understand. That night, when Marcus's music began, Eleanor stayed behind locked doors, but at 3:15 an insistent knocking came. "You haven't come," Marcus said when she finally opened the door, his expression concerned. "Is everything all right?" Eleanor looked at him, this man whose words had once cut her deeply, who now looked at her with genuine care. "I read your review," she said flatly, "from 6 years ago. My Chopin recording." The color drained from Marcus's face. "Eleanor, did you know who I was when you moved here?" The question that had been burning inside her since morning. "No," he answered quickly. "Too quickly, you're lying." Eleanor's voice was steady despite the storm inside her. Was this some kind of experiment? Watching the fallen pianist struggle? Material for your next composition, perhaps? "That's not—" "I think you should leave," Eleanor said, cutting him off. "Please." As she closed the door, the silence between their cottages felt different now, no longer peaceful but charged with unspoken words and broken trust. For the first time since Marcus had arrived, no music played that night, and Eleanor's dreams, when they finally came, were discordant and troubled. Harmony and silence. A week of silence stretched between the cottages. Eleanor removed the batteries from her clock, unable to bear the reminder of 3 a.m. without music. She threw herself into aggressive gardening, attacking weeds and pruning roses until her good hand blistered. The silence spoke louder than any composition. On the 8th day, a letter appeared beneath her door, handwritten on music manuscript paper. Eleanor nearly burned it unread, but curiosity won out. "I knew who you were before I moved here," Marcus had written. "Not to study or judge you, but because I owed you a truth I was too cowardly to deliver in person. The day of your accident, I was in Vienna to apologize. That review, the cruelest I've ever written, haunted me when I heard how audiences were moved to tears by your later performances. I realized I had been writing about myself, not you. My criticism was a projection of my own emotional walls. But then you disappeared into this small town and I lost my courage. When the cottage beside yours became available 3 years later, I convinced myself it was coincidence, not conscience, that brought me here." Eleanor's hand trembled as she read. Outside her window, rain began to fall, pattering against glass in nature's own composition. That evening, she crossed the garden, manuscript in hand, and found Marcus sitting at his piano, not playing, just staring at the keys as if they might whisper secrets. "Why did you stop composing after my accident?" she asked from the doorway. He didn't turn, didn't seem surprised by her presence. "Because I believed my words might have pushed you to prove something. To take that flight, that cab ride, to be somewhere you wouldn't have been if not for my arrogance." "That's absurdly self-important," Eleanor said, entering the room fully. "Critics don't cause accidents, perhaps not, but they can cause harm that outlasts physical injury." He finally looked at her. "I haven't published a review since, and I couldn't compose until I came here." Eleanor sat beside him on the bench, placing careful distance between them. "When the doctors told me I would never play professionally again, I thought I had lost everything. But it wasn't just the music I missed. It was feeling understood through it. Being heard." "Yet you've heard every note I've written these past weeks," Marcus observed quietly. "And you've listened to every suggestion I couldn't play," she countered. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof in a crescendo. "I've been composing something," Marcus said after a long pause. "A piece that only requires one hand." "The right hand." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "I don't need your pity. It's not pity, it's partnership." He shifted on the bench. "You interpret as I create. We become what the other lacks." Eleanor stared at the keys, ivory and ebony blurring through unshed tears. "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can finish this composition," he admitted, "but I'd rather fail trying than succeed at silence." Slowly, Eleanor raised her right hand, letting it hover over the keys. Marcus placed a sheet of music before her, simple, elegant notes that required only 5 fingers. "Play what you can," he whispered. "I'll hear the rest." When her fingers finally pressed down, the sound was hesitant but clear, a single melody line that hung in the air between them like a question. And for the first time since her accident, the music Eleanor made wasn't a memory, but a beginning. The symphony returned spring arrived at Blackberry Lane with an explosion of color, daffodils lining the stone wall between the cottages, cherry blossoms dusting the path that Eleanor and Marcus had worn between their doors. For 6 months they had been creating together, he composing, she interpreting with her one good hand, both of them healing through the exchange. The Somerset Music Festival called again, Vivian announced one morning, placing the mail beside Eleanor's tea. 4th time this month. Eleanor glanced at the envelope, no longer feeling the stab of loss it once provoked. They're persistent. They want the premiere, Marcus said from the doorway where he'd appeared with a folder of sheet music. I told them we're considering it. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. We? Our piece has 2 parts, composer and interpreter. His eyes held a challenge. It's time the world heard what we've created. The composition they had written, fragments whole, had evolved from a simple right-hand exercise to something revolutionary. A concerto written specifically for a pianist with one functioning hand, with the orchestra carrying what would traditionally be the left-hand parts. It was unlike anything in the classical canon, not an accommodation for disability but a celebration of adaptation. I haven't been on stage since, I know. Marcus sat beside her at the kitchen table. Neither have I. That's why it matters. 2 weeks later, Eleanor found herself in the Somerset Concert Hall's green room, staring at her reflection. Her performance dress, midnight blue simple, had been altered to elegantly accommodate her left arm. Marcus paced nearby, uncharacteristically nervous. What if they don't understand what we're trying to do? He murmured. Eleanor smiled, recognizing the echo of her own former fears. Then they're not listening properly. When she walked on stage, the spotlight caught the silver threads now prominent in her dark hair. Battle scars from years of pain, transformed into wisdom. The audience's murmurs faded as she seated herself at the gleaming Steinway. From the conductor's podium, Marcus met her eyes. No words were needed between them now. They had found a language beyond criticism or praise, beyond limitation or perfection. As Eleanor's right hand struck the first notes, clear, confident, alive, the orchestra responded like an extension of herself, carrying the melody where her left hand could not. In the third movement, when Eleanor reached the cadenza they had labored over for months, time seemed to suspend. Her right hand danced across the keys with a freedom born from constraint, telling a story of loss and discovery that no two-handed composition could have expressed. When the final note faded, the silence lasted 3 heartbeats, then erupted into thunderous applause. Eleanor rose, her damaged hand no longer hidden but resting naturally at her side, a part of her whole self. Backstage, Marcus waited, his eyes bright with unshed tears. That wasn't just playing, he said, taking her hands, both of them in his. That was truth? Eleanor smiled. No, that was music. The kind that comes after silence. As they returned for their bow, Eleanor realized that their greatest composition wasn't the concerto itself, but the harmony they had created from their broken pieces, a melody that neither could have discovered alone. What kind of proposition? The Harrington Foundation needs people who understand the value of things beyond money. People with your kind of perspective, Theo hesitated. Suspicious of charity disguised as opportunity. Reading his expression, Dominic added, This isn't pity. Mr. Maxwell, it's recognition of worth. I'll consider it, Theo said cautiously. But right now, your daughter needs you, Dominic finished for him. As it should be. Full circle 1 year later, autumn painted Chicago in amber and crimson. Penelope Maxwell raced ahead on the walking path of Lincoln Park, her cardigan flapping behind her like wings. At 9 years old, the scar on her chest was now just another constellation in her personal sky, a reminder of battles won and second chances granted. Daddy, look. The leaves are dancing, she called back to Theo, who walked alongside Dominic Harrington, both men watching her with quiet joy. She has more energy than I remember having at her age, Dominic observed, his typically formal demeanor softened by a year of regular interaction with the Maxwells. The doctors say her heart is stronger than they expected, Theo replied. Sometimes I still wake up at night just to check that she's breathing normally. Old habits. The past year had transformed both men's lives in ways neither could have anticipated during that first real conversation in the hospital lounge. Theo now served as outreach director for the newly expanded Harrington Foundation, overseeing programs that provided medical assistance to families caught in financial gaps. His first-hand experience navigating the healthcare labyrinth made him uniquely qualified to reshape the foundation's approach. For Dominic, the change had been more subtle, but no less profound. The walls he'd built around himself since Gregory's death had begun to crumble, one brick at a time. His return to public philanthropy had surprised the business world, though he still shunned interviews and galas in favor of more direct involvement. The board approved the expansion to 3 more hospitals, Dominic said as they walked. Your proposal was compelling. It wasn't just mine, Theo demurred. The whole team contributed. But it was your story that moved them, Dominic insisted. Numbers and statistics don't change hearts. Stories do. They reached a bench overlooking the pond where Penelope was now tossing breadcrumbs to eager ducks, her laughter carrying across the water. I've been meaning to ask you something, Theo said, watching his daughter. That day in the hospital hallway before the surgery, did you plan to run into us? Dominic's rare smile appeared. Janet would say there are no coincidences, only orchestrated opportunities. That's not an answer. Perhaps I needed to see her, Dominic admitted. To remind myself that this wasn't just a transaction, that there was a real child, a real father. He paused. I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful you tracked me down afterward. Theo nodded, understanding the weight of that admission from a man who had once valued privacy above all else. The job offer was unexpected. Self-serving, actually, Dominic replied. The foundation needed someone who understood both sides of the equation. Empathy and pragmatism in equal measure. From his pocket, Dominic withdrew a small velvet box and handed it to Theo. For Penelope, 1 year of her new heart deserves commemoration. Inside the box lay a delicate silver necklace with a small star-shaped pendant, tiny diamonds catching the autumn sunlight. Dominic, this is too much. It's nothing, the billionaire interrupted gently. Besides, Janet picked it out. Apparently, I have abysmal taste in children's jewelry. This casual mention of Janet by her first name wasn't lost on Theo. The strictly professional relationship between Dominic and his chief of staff had warmed considerably in recent months. Another wall slowly crumbling. Penny, Theo called. Come see what Mr. Harrington brought you. Penelope bounded over, cheeks flushed with health and excitement. When she saw the necklace, her eyes widened. It's like a real star. For my favorite astronomer, Dominic said as Theo helped fasten it around her neck. Can I show the ducks? She asked, already turning back toward the pond. Don't get too close to the edge, Theo cautioned, watching her skip away. You've done remarkable work with her, Dominic observed. She carries no shadow of her illness. Children are resilient. It's adults who hold on to pain. Theo glanced sideways at his employer and friend. Speaking of which, Janet mentioned you finally cleared out Gregory's room. Dominic was quiet for a moment. Yes, it was time. Some of his things went to medical research facilities. The rest, he shrugged. The past belongs in the past. The present has proven more compelling than I expected. They sat in comfortable silence, watching Penelope charming the ducks. The Foundation's newest initiative, a program specifically designed to catch families before they reached financial breaking points, had been Dominic's idea, but bore Theo's practical influence. Together, they'd created something neither could have accomplished alone. You know, Theo said eventually, a year ago I thought receiving that anonymous donation was the miracle. I was wrong. Oh? Dominic raised an eyebrow. The money saved Penny's life, yes, but the real miracle was what happened after. Finding purpose again, seeing you find yours. Theo met the billionaire's gaze directly. The money was just the beginning of the story, not the end. Dominic nodded slowly. When Gregory died, I thought that was the end of my story too. I existed, I accumulated wealth, but I wasn't living. He watched Penelope twirl, her necklace catching the light. I never expected to find meaning in a hospital hallway. Life rarely follows the expected path, Theo agreed. Later that evening, after Dominic had returned to his penthouse and Penelope was tucked in bed, Theo sat at his kitchen table reviewing applications for the Foundation's newest program. Each family's story echoed his own from a year before. Desperate parents, sick children, impossible choices. But now, instead of helplessness, he felt purpose. Each file represented not just a problem to solve, but a story to change. On his refrigerator hung a child's drawing, Penelope's rendering of the night sky, with one particular star shining brighter than the rest. Beneath it, in her careful handwriting, "For Daddy and Mr. H, the best constellation." Theo smiled at the drawing. The universe worked in strange ways. A year ago, he'd been broken by the weight of tomorrow. Now tomorrow itself was a gift he no longer feared. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Dominic. Thinking about expanding the cardiac program to include research grants. Gregory's legacy deserves more than memory. The response came quickly. Monday 9 a.m., bring coffee and your ideas. Janet says hello. Theo set down his phone, feeling the quiet contentment of a life rebuilt on stronger foundations. Outside his window, the stars shimmered, distant, yet somehow more attainable than they had seemed a year ago. Sometimes the greatest distance wasn't between wealth and poverty, but between isolation and connection. Between seeing value only in what could be counted and recognizing worth in what couldn't. Penelope's laughter echoed from her bedroom. She was talking to her stuffed animals again, creating adventures for them among her imaginary stars. The sound filled their small apartment with something greater than any penthouse could contain. Theo closed the file he was reading and walked to his daughter's doorway, simply watching her play. The miracle wasn't just that she was alive, it was that her life had saved two men from very different kinds of poverty. And in that knowledge, both had found a wealth beyond measure.